4 pillars of self-mastery. I created this program because conditioning is fairly persistent. Now, we talk about how to overcome the conditioning that was largely set between ages 0 and 7. However, myelinated neurons, which is basically a habit is the path of least resistance, and a myelinated neural pathway is that path of least resistance. They can come back if you allow them. When you start moving above the line and you're doing things that you never thought you could do, oftentimes we run into this lack of familiarity, which can trigger a little bit of stress. It's important to recognize that there's going to be cognitive dissonance, but that doesn't mean the habit didn't work or the habit replacement didn't work. It's just a matter of leaning into what you plan to do, let the cognitive dissonance dissipate, and the neuroplasticity takes place overnight. So you'll find oftentimes that sometimes you may feel like a little bit of tension, maybe things aren't going to work, and you go to bed, you wake up the next day and you have these breakthroughs. That's because neuroplasticity is happening overnight. So the habit change is 3 parts. First of all, you have to decide what the new pathway is, and you start building that new pathway. You have to decide why that's important. That keeps you coming back and keeps you in the game. And then you have to interrupt the old pattern. That 3-part process largely takes place overnight. We can intellectualize around why, we can intellectualize around the new habit, but in order for that new habit to take place, you're going to have to interrupt the old pattern. I use the example of training a dog because most people have either trained a dog, visualized it, or seen somebody else training the dog, and there's a process. You don't just have the dog, they don't understand English, first of all, so you can't just tell them roll over and bark. But what you can do is get them to sit, and when they learn to sit, you can get them to lay down. When you get them to lay down, you can get them to roll over. But the example I like to use is stay. So you get them to sit, you start walking away, they follow you the first time, you say stay, you put your hand up. That's like a pattern interrupt. The dog started moving, you interrupted the pattern with your hand and the word stay, and you may have to go back over there and have them sit down again and start 2 or 3 tries. If the dog is young and fairly obedient, it doesn't take very long, and then they get it. They're supposed to stay. But then you walk away 10 steps, and maybe they want to move. Stay. You repeat that. This is largely how we interact with our network of neurons, except your conscious mind is governing the network of neurons. It's not a person and a dog. It's your conscious mind governing the network of neurons. And what makes it interesting is that the network of neurons is so fast, processes so fast, and processes so much information in a very short period of time, it gets the jump on the conscious mind, and the conscious mind ends up taking the back seat. Largely because we've thought for so long that the subconscious is a mind. Subconscious is not a mind. We'll talk about that. So the reason I came up with the 4 pillars of self-mastery is to give people a model that they can use for self-coaching. I also extended the follow-up for a year because ideally when we're doing a transformation, we're going to step into unfamiliar territory, breakthrough, land of infinite possibilities. When you do that, it's like unpeeling an onion, and you're going to constantly find new things that are coming into play. And those new things could trigger old habits. The reason I'm doing this is to educate about neuroplasticity, because some people think neuroplasticity is NLP. Some people think neuroplasticity is positive mental attitude or law of attraction manifestation. And others think it's emotional intelligence. And then part of that is because neuroplasticity is still very new in the context of neuroscience. Neuroscience, if you think about studying a 300,000-year-old brain, we've only known that neuroplasticity applies to cognitive processing as well as physical. So the physical processing was figured out in the 1950s. Cognitive processing with respect to neuroplasticity wasn't discovered until early 1990s. Emotional intelligence was already created. Emotional intelligence was already being popularized by mid-90s. And at that time, it was still saying that habits can't be changed. Intelligence can't be changed. Your identity is fixed. And the point about neuroplasticity still being new is heavy in the research labs, but it's mostly for rehab, getting back to status quo. It's used in physical therapy, but of course, that's more on the physical muscular side. Neuroplasticity is peer-reviewed science. It is real science, not taking anything away from NLP. NLP is not a science as is like cognitive behavioral therapy or emotional intelligence or neuroplasticity. NLP is a modeling protocol of getting the best of the best and teaching it to others. It was the framework that allowed them to look at what therapists were doing to get the best of the best kind of results, teaching that to other therapists, and it leveled everybody up. So NLP has some really good content, but again, it's an instructional protocol. So you will see some things in there that are from cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. There's some information in there, some tactics in there from FBI investigative techniques. But you don't want to confuse NLP with neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the direct process to change habits. If I look at law of attraction, vibration, and the genetics, some of your protocols out of neurolinguistic programming, cognitive behavioral therapy, Gestalt, all of those things are doing neuroplasticity indirectly. They are changing habits. They're creating new paths of least resistance, but they're doing it indirectly. Neuroplasticity is direct. I'm doing these weekly classes to make that point clearer. Once I saw that less than 2.5% of coaches, these are coaches who are working with people to help them show up as the best version of themselves, only about 2.5% actually understand how to apply neuroplasticity. I said, we've got to do something here. So I shifted from attracting clients in the leadership space to helping coaches improve their neuroplasticity, understand it, and you'll hear me talk about allostatic neuroplasticity. So these live events are a way for me to build out the curriculum for those coaches, as well as teaching people, because like I said, there's so much misunderstanding. There's no real group that's moving or promoting neuroplasticity because it's still in its infancy. It's confusing, right? If you think about all the textbooks have called it a subconscious mind, and now all of a sudden neuroplasticity says it's not a mind, it's a network of neurons. Neuroplasticity doesn't say that, but the science says it's a network of neurons. Neuroplasticity is the act of replacing paths of least resistance with new paths of least resistance and allowing the other path to go dormant. And NLP is an interesting one because I've had people think that they know what neuroplasticity is. I certified in NLP twice in two different groups, once with more of a business-oriented side, and then I did it again with therapists and psychiatrists. And at that time, I thought that we would be here within a few years. It's taken 3 decades for us to get to the point where we're talking about this in a way. That's why I have dynamic leadership, is we're talking about it in a way that it can be applied by leaders. So it's not law of attraction, it's none of those things, but I would say those probably helped because they all got results here and there, but it was an indirect action on neuroplasticity.